The rain fell in slow, heavy sheets. Not the violent kind that screams against windows, but the quiet kind that soaks into everything and leaves the world muffled and strange. Kael Thorne dragged his duffel bag up the cracked concrete steps of his old apartment, each step heavier than the last. 6 months. 6 months orbiting dead planets on a mining rig, so far from home it felt like memory had worn thin. All he wanted now was a hot shower and 12 hours of sleep. Nothing more complicated than that. The hallway light flickered overhead as he reached the door. Familiar. Ugly. Home. He punched in the code on the ancient keypad. The door unlocked with a reluctant hiss. He reached for the handle and stopped, because someone was standing there. A girl, no umbrella, no jacket, just a long silver-blue cloak soaked through by the rain, clinging to a body that looked almost too perfect to be real. Her hair fell like molten silver around her shoulders. Her skin shimmered faintly, a soft light under the storm. In her eyes they glowed, not brightly, just enough to catch him and not let go. Kael stared, tired, confused, half convinced he had finally cracked after too many cycles breathing recycled air. "Can I help you?" he managed. The girl tilted her head slightly, a gesture so familiar it made his chest ache for reasons he could not explain. She smiled small, almost shy. And then she said the words that shattered the rest of his tired, simple night into something he could never come back from. "Husband, you finally came back." Kael blinked, stared harder. The rain dripped from her cloak, puddling at her bare feet. No visible weapons, no threat in her posture, but everything about her radiated something heavier than danger. Certainty. He opened his mouth, closed it, because there were so many questions that none of them could even make it to his lips. "You have the wrong person," he said carefully. "I am not married." The girl smiled wider, not cruel, not mocking, tender, patient. "You are Kael Thorne," she said, "born on Epsilon Colony, engineer, survivor of the Ares Drift incident. You used to hum old Earth songs when you worked because you thought it kept the machines from feeling lonely." He froze. A chill raced down his spine, colder than the rain. "No one should know that. No one." She stepped closer, slow, deliberate, and Kael noticed something else. A faint silver line ran along the inside of her wrist, a seam too perfect, too thin, not human, not entirely. Cyborg. Maybe alien tech. Maybe worse. He took a half step back. She stopped immediately, hands open at her sides. "I will not hurt you," she said. "I promised you once that I never would, even if you forgot me, even if they made you." Kael shook his head, trying to clear it, trying to find the logic thread that could untangle this hallucination from reality. "I do not know you. I swear I have never seen you before." The girl nodded. "And yet I know you. I have waited for you. I have found you, and I will help you remember." The storm thickened around them, a world shrinking to the narrow space between two people, one certain, one shattering. Kael stared into her glowing eyes, felt the first frayed edge of memory tug at the corner of his mind. Something lost, something stolen, something aching to be found. And in that suspended breath between heartbeats, Kael Thorne realized one terrible, beautiful truth. His life had not begun the way he remembered. And the girl at his door, the girl made of rain and light and impossible promises, was about to tear open everything he thought he knew. The rain whispered against the cracked concrete. Kael Thorne stood frozen, the weight of the duffel bag forgotten at his side, as the girl stepped forward into the weak light bleeding from the open door. Inside, the apartment smelled the same. Old wood, dust, a hint of burned circuits from the kitchen outlet he had never bothered to fix. It should have been comforting. It should have been a place untouched by the strange. Instead, it felt like the first breath before a storm. She crossed the threshold without hesitation. Her bare feet made no sound on the worn floorboards. Kael did not stop her. He did not know why. Maybe it was the way she moved, like she belonged, like she had walked through that door 1,000 times before, and would walk through it 1,000 times again. She turned once inside, watching him waiting, as if the next move had always been his. Kael closed the door. The lock clicked into place. The sound seemed louder than it should have. The girl tilted her head. You are afraid it was not a question. Kael set down the bag, crossed his arms, trying to build a wall from posture alone, trying to breathe through a throat tightening with something he did not understand. I do not know you, he said again. His voice sounded wrong, thin, weak. The girl smiled softly. You said that last time too. He blinked. What? She walked slowly through the room, touching nothing, only looking, every corner, every shadow, her gaze lingering on the cracked frame by the window, the old heater that rattled when it ran, the place where he had patched a bullet hole in the wall years ago and never told anyone about it. She remembered it all, even when he could not. You always return, she said. You always find me, even when they break you, even when they take your memories. You find me. Every time. Kael felt a pulse behind his eyes, a throbbing, a warning, or maybe a door beginning to crack open. I have never left this planet, he said. I have never been married. I have never, he stopped. Because even as the words left him, they felt wrong, incomplete, like an actor reading a script missing half its lines. She stepped closer, close enough for him to see the fine network of silver lines tracing her temples disappearing beneath her skin. Not mechanical, not artificial, alive, part of her. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You promised no matter what they did, no matter how many times they wiped you clean, you would come back to me. And you did. You always do. Kael pressed a hand to his forehead. Memories not his clawing at the edges of thought. Images, sounds, a hand reaching through fire, a voice singing in a language he could not name. Laughter, tears, a promise whispered against the stars. I will find you again, no matter what, no matter when. The girl reached into the folds of her soaked cloak, pulled out something small, delicate, a silver locket. She held it out to him without speaking. Kael hesitated, then took it. It was warm against his skin, too warm, alive. He clicked it open. Inside, a tiny hollow image flickered to life. Two figures, standing together beneath a canopy of alien trees, leaves like fire, and silk smiling holding hands. One of them was him, and the other was her. Kael staggered back a step. The locket dangled from his fingers. The room spun. The rain outside deepened, drumming against the windows like 1,000 small voices urging him to remember. The girl watched him, silent, patient hope and sadness woven into every line of her face. You made a promise, she whispered. You swore you would always come back, even if you forgot, even if you were broken. You would find me. You would remember. Because love is not stored in memory, Kael. It is written in the soul. And Kael Thorne, standing in the battered apartment he thought he had always known, felt something ancient and unbreakable stir awake inside him. Not fear, not confusion, recognition, and the first crack of a world he had thought was real splitting wide open. The locket felt heavier than it should have. Kael Thorne turned it over in his hands as if the weight might explain something the words could not. The hollow image inside flickered with every movement. Two figures standing under a sky, the color of molten gold, laughing, holding each other like gravity had no claim on them. Him and her, Ilara Selen, the girl who claimed she was his wife. He dropped onto the worn couch. The springs groaned under his weight. The rain pressed harder against the windows as if the whole world outside strained to hear what would happen next. Ilara stood nearby, silent, waiting. She made no move to push, no desperate pleading, just the kind of stillness that said she had already waited longer than any sane heart should endure. Kael traced the edge of the locket. It was battered, scuffed in a way that spoke of years carried through battles and storms. Yet it had survived, just like her, just like something in him. He closed his eyes, held the locket tighter, and the memories came. Not as images, not yet, first as feelings. Warmth against cold metal floors, laughter echoing through corridors carved from alien stone, the feel of a hand slipping into his in the dark, steady, certain, a voice whispering promises against his skin. A vow made not once, but over and over, because they had always known forgetting was a risk. Not because they wanted to, because they had enemies who needed them forgotten, erased, broken. Kael opened his eyes. The room shifted, not visibly, not in any way a scanner would catch, but he felt it, as if reality itself buckled under the strain of two truths colliding, the truth he had been taught to believe, and the truth clawing its way out from under the wreckage. He looked at Alara. "You really believe all of this?" Her smile broke his heart a little. "I do not need to believe it. I lived it. I loved you when you had nothing, when your hands were broken and your voice was hoarse from screaming at a sky that never answered. I loved you when you built dreams from scrap metal, and hope I loved you when you stood between me and everything that wanted me erased. You do not have to remember that to make it real. You just have to trust what your soul already knows." Kael swallowed hard. The locket clicked shut in his hand with a soft finality, like a door closing or a heart locking a secret away. Only this time he was the one reaching for the key. He stood. The room seemed smaller than it had a moment ago. Or maybe he had grown larger, filled with something he had been missing for too long. "I want to know," he said. "I want to remember." Alara exhaled a shaky breath that sounded like hope barely held together by fear. "Then come with me," she said, "and I will show you the pieces they tried to rip away, one by one, until you see yourself again." Outside, the rain slowed, softened as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Waiting. Because some stories do not begin with a grand revelation. Some stories begin with a hand reaching out in the dark, and the other hand choosing to take it. Kael reached out. Alara took his hand. Warm, solid, real. The locket swung between them, silver flashing. Once in the dim light, a tiny star caught between two lost souls finding their orbit again. And for the first time in too long, Kael Thorne did not feel lost. He felt found. The night stretched wide and heavy around them. Kael Thorne and Alara Selen moved through the empty streets, the rain easing into a soft mist that clung to their clothes and skin, like a second layer of uncertainty. Every step away from his apartment felt like peeling back another sheet of reality. Kael kept the locket tucked tight in his jacket, a tiny anchor against the unraveling storm inside him. Alara walked at his side, not leading, not following, but matching him, stride for stride. Like she had done before, like she had always done even if he could not yet remember it all. They reached the edge of the old freight yards. Dead lights swung in the mist. Cargo containers rusted in long-forgotten rows. The world felt abandoned, forgotten as if it too had been erased, just like the memories slipping back into Kael's mind, one heartbeat at a time. Alara stopped near a collapsed tower frame. She crouched, ran a hand over the dirt. Found what she was looking for, a hidden panel. She pried it open with a short twist of her wrist, and inside, nested like a secret, was a black case no larger than a book. She handed it to Kael. He hesitated, took it. The case vibrated faintly in his hands, alive, waiting. "Inside you will find a part of your past they could not destroy," Alara said quietly. "I hid it here after they took you. I could not save everything, but I saved enough." Kael ran his fingers over the smooth surface. The weight of it was different than the locket, heavier, like it carried not just memories but decisions, consequences. Before he could open it, a low hum sliced through the mist. Not mechanical, not natural. A sound tuned to alert nerves, to snap instincts awake. Kael turned, heart hammering against his ribs. From the shadows, three dark figures emerged. No insignia, no words, only purpose. Their armor was matte black, built for killing without reflection. Their weapons cradled casually in their arms, as if violence was not a choice, but a simple extension of breath. Alara stepped in front of Kael without hesitation. "No," Kael rasped. He moved to shield her, but she shook her head once. "They are here for you," she said, "not for me. They want to erase you again before you can remember too much. Before you can become a threat they cannot control." The nearest figure raised a hand. A crackling voice buzzed from a speaker embedded in his helmet. "Return with us. You are unauthorized to retain fragmented data." "Surrender," Kael gritted his teeth. Memory surged behind his eyes. Not images. Not yet. Feelings. Pain. A bright white room. Cold metal against his skin. Hands holding him down. the sound of something being ripped from him over and over until he stopped screaming, until he forgot. He stepped forward, felt the locket thump once against his chest, felt Ilara's hand brush his arm, a grounding touch. "No," he said. The word was small, simple, but it cracked the air like lightning. The figures shifted, weapons lifted, threats crackled louder. "Surrender now or be neutralized." Ilara smiled a small, terrible, beautiful smile. "You should have erased me too," she said, "because now he remembers enough, and remembering is the end of your control." Kael moved first, not running, not hiding, moving toward them, choosing. Behind him, Ilara followed, and behind her a future not yet written pulsed against the fog. The first shot split the night. The first choice had already been made. The night tore apart around them. The first shot sizzled past Kael's ear, burning a line of heat through the mist. He ducked behind the crumpled tower frame as Ilara pulled him down, her body a shield even as more gunfire shattered the silence. The black armored figures moved like wraiths, fast, precise, lethal. But Kael had something now that they could not calculate, something no programming could predict. Memory, or at least the beginning of it. He clutched the black case tighter to his chest. The locket thudded against his ribs with every heartbeat, a reminder, a pulse, a promise. Ilara pressed close beside him, her voice low and sharp. "We have to move. There is a lab under the old station yard. If we can get there, we can access the chip." Kael nodded. No time for fear, no time for doubt, only forward, always forward. They broke cover together, running low between rusted cargo containers, dodging pulse blasts that scorched the air around them. The old station loomed ahead, a skeleton of metal and broken glass half swallowed by vines and decay. Ilara led the way, her movements fluid, focused, a fighter who had nothing left to lose, but everything to save. They reached a service hatch barely hanging from its hinges. Ilara ripped it open. Pushed Kael through first. He stumbled into the darkness, the heavy smell of oil and old circuits wrapping around him like a shroud. Ilara dropped in after him, slamming the hatch shut just as another blast shattered the ground behind them. Dust and ash rained down, but for now they were inside. The lab was a tomb. Ancient machines lined the walls, screens cracked and blinking ghostly static. Somewhere deep in the shadows, an emergency generator coughed to life, casting a sickly yellow glow across the room. Ilara crossed to a battered terminal, plugged a cable from her wrist directly into the port. The screen flickered. Alive. Waiting. Kael placed the black case on the table. The lock recognized his biometric signature, immediately hissing open with a quiet release of pressurized air. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a single memory chip, no bigger than his thumb. It pulsed faintly, alive, terrified, hopeful. Like it had been waiting for him all this time. Ilara disconnected from the terminal, turned to him. "You have to decide," she said. "Once we upload it, there is no going back. Everything they erased, everything they made you forget, it will come back. And it will hurt." Kael stared at the chip, felt the weight of it, not physical, existential, the kind of weight that bends universes, that tips worlds into wars or peace. He thought of the locket, the flash of silver in the rain, the echo of promises made in the dark, the feel of Ilara's hand closing around his unwavering reel. He reached out, took the chip, slid it into the port. The terminal flared to life. Data cascaded across the screen, a flood of images, sounds, names, faces, and then pain. Sharp, blinding, ripping through his mind like a wire pulled too tight. Kael gasped, gripping the edge of the table, the world tilting, shattering. He saw himself standing before Ilara under a sky filled with alien stars. He saw himself holding her as the world burned around them. He saw himself ripped from her arms, dragged into sterile rooms, voices shouting, "Erase him, erase everything." And he saw himself, even in the dark, even broken, whispering one last promise. "Find me. No matter what they do, find me." Kael collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, sweat slicking his skin, tears burning his eyes. Ilara knelt beside him, her hands steady on his back. "You found me," she whispered. "You came back. You always do." The generator whined. The building shook. More footsteps thundered above. The ones who tried to erase him were closing in. But it did not matter anymore. Kael Thorne remembered all of it, and he would not let them take it away again. He stood, taller, stronger, whole. He turned to Alara, eyes burning with something fierce and unstoppable. "Let's finish this," he said, and together they moved toward the door, toward the fight waiting for them, toward the future they refused to surrender. The hatch blew outward with a sound like thunder cracking open the sky. Kael Thorne and Alara Selen burst into the night, the cold slapping their skin like a living thing, the mist now thick with falling snow. The world beyond the ruined station was not empty. It seethed with black armored figures spread out across the freight yard like a net waiting to snap shut. Pulse rifles hummed with lethal energy. Drones buzzed through the thick air, searching, calculating. A voice barked through the loudspeakers, metallic and cold. "Surrender, Kael Thorne. Surrender, Alara Selen. Memory corruption is not tolerated. Compliance will be met with mercy. Resistance will be met with extinction." Kael looked at Alara. Snow clung to her hair, turning her silver strands into a crown of frost. Her eyes glowed brighter now, lit from within by something no machine could program or kill. He tightened his grip on the scavenged sidearm he had pulled from the lab. Not enough to win, but enough to say no. Enough to say, "I remember." Alara touched his arm once, quick grounding. Together, always. The first wave charge. Shadows with no faces, no mercy, no soul. Kael moved first, firing in quick bursts, not wild, controlled. Each shot bought them a few more precious feet across the open ground. Alara moved with a lethal grace, ducking low, springing up, using her augmented strength to tear through the front line with brutal efficiency. Not a berserker, a storm. Precise, relentless. But there were too many, a dozen more, 24, closing in, cutting off escape routes. Kael skidded behind a broken loader unit, breath ragged in his chest. "We need a way out," he shouted over the rising noise. Alara scanned the yard, found it. A supply tunnel half collapsed, hidden beyond the far cargo wall. If they could reach it, they might have a chance. If. She locked eyes with Kael. No words needed, only trust. Only the memory of 1,000 fights fought side by side, even if he could not yet name them all. They moved, fast, hard. Snow sprang up in sheets behind their boots. Bullets and pulse blasts tore chunks from the containers around them. A drone swooped low, targeting. Kael spun, fired. The drone exploded in a shower of sparks. They kept running. The wall loomed ahead, the tunnel mouth barely visible through the swirling snow. Hope flared in Kael's chest. Hope that slammed into the ground when a new figure stepped into view, blocking the tunnel entrance, not like the others. This one stood taller, armored, heavier, a leader. A warden, programmed to hunt those who dared to remember. A weapon designed not to capture, but to erase. The warden lifted an arm. A crackling charge built at the barrel of his weapon. One shot. That was all it would take. One shot to end them. Kael planted his feet in the snow, raised the sidearm, even knowing it would not be enough, because sometimes enough is not measured in firepower. It is measured in will. The warden fired. Alara moved faster. She slammed into Kael, knocking him sideways, the blast missing them by inches, scorching a crater into the frozen ground. She rolled to her feet, dragging him up. "Go," she shouted. Kael shook his head. "Not without you. Never without you." The warden advanced. Cold, precise, unstoppable. Kael felt the old fire kindle inside him, the fire they had tried to drown, the fire they had failed to erase. He grabbed a fallen charge pack from the ground, slammed it into the sidearm's feed, a desperate patch and overload waiting to happen. He smiled grimly. Perfect. He stood, faced the warden head on, Alara beside him, shoulder to shoulder. They fired together. The sidearm bucked once, twice, then exploded in Kael's hand in a burst of blinding blue-white light. The warden staggered, shielding his face. The blast cracked the armor at his chest. Kael did not stop. He charged, slammed into the warden with every ounce of strength he had. The warden stumbled, off balance. Alara followed, striking low, sweeping his legs. The warden crashed to the ground. Kael grabbed Alara's hand. "Run," he rasped. Now they sprinted for the tunnel. Bullets chased them. The snow swallowed them, and somewhere behind the warden roared in rage and defeat. But it was too late. They were gone. Into the dark. Into the unknown. But for the first time in too long, they were running towards something not away. The tunnel led them into the earth, winding through layers of forgotten stone and frost, until the noise of pursuit faded behind them, swallowed by the dark. Their boots echoed on the wet floor, the sound sharp and lonely in the silence. Kael Thorne tightened his grip on Alara's hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers, the tension in her shoulders. Not fear. Readiness. A heart still braced against a world that had tried to unmake them both. They emerged into a vast underground chamber. The Unity Archive, ancient, silent, alive. Light pulsed softly along the walls, veins of energy running through cracked marble and broken tech. The air smelled of dust and something older, something almost holy. Kael stared, felt the weight of memory thicken the air until breathing was an effort. Alara moved ahead, drawn toward the center. There on a raised platform, a single terminal waited, its screen dark. She placed her hand against it. The lines on her skin shimmered bright against the gloom. The terminal flickered, coughed to life, and cast a pale glow across the chamber. A prompt appeared. Authorization required. Kael stepped forward, placed his palm against the secondary pad. The system hesitated, then accepted. Because somewhere inside him, even if they had wiped his memories, his soul still remembered the shape of her, still remembered the promises made, the vows no one could erase. The archive opened. Holograms bloomed around them, ghosts of a life Kael barely recognized, but his heart seized upon without hesitation. There he was, younger, unscarred, standing beneath a canopy of living trees that shimmered like liquid light. There was Alara in a gown woven with silver threads, her eyes laughing, her smile soft and sure. They stood hand in hand, their foreheads pressed together, as an efficient spoken a language Kael could not name, but somehow understood. Words of unity, of defiance, of love that crossed stars and species and fear. A record played, clear, unbroken. Kael Thorne and Alara Selen. Do you swear to find each other no matter the distance, no matter the darkness, no matter the forces that would tear you apart? Do you swear to remember even if memory is stolen, even if time is broken? Do you swear to love when all else is lost? They had answered together. We swear. Kael dropped to his knees, the force of the memory too much. Tears burned in his eyes, hot and relentless. Alara knelt beside him. Her hand found his. Real, solid. Here. Now you married me, he whispered. You married me when the whole galaxy wanted us to forget. And I never forgot, she said. Not once. Not even when they tore you away. Not even when they told me you were dead. I waited. I believed. I found you. The archive pulsed once, almost gently, as if acknowledging their defiance, their survival. Kael rose to his feet. Not broken, not lost. He reached for Alara, pulling her into his arms. Held her as if the world outside the archive no longer mattered. And maybe for a moment it did not. Above them, the old systems of the Unity Archive sent out a signal, a quiet ripple across forgotten networks, a message not of war, not of control, but of something far more dangerous to those who built Cage's hope. Memory, love, unbroken. And outside, in the ruins of a world built on silence, something ancient stirred and remembered. The broadcast went live at dawn. Across every colony, every station clinging to the edge of forgotten systems. Every home where fear had silenced truth for too long. The signal from the Unity Archive bypassed sensors, overrode firewalls, cut through the static of controlled news feeds. And it showed them Kael Thorne and Alara Selen standing hand in hand under the canopy of alien stars, pledging vows that no empire had ever sanctioned. Smiling, crying, swearing loyalty, not to a government, not to a species, but to each other. A human and a cyborg hybrid, an impossible love, a forbidden truth. The world stopped to watch. The streets emptied. The factories ground silent. The war councils paused their endless calculations. And for the first time and longer than anyone dared remember, the people chose to listen instead of obey. The leaders reacted first. They screamed of sedition, of contamination, of treason against the natural order. They demanded immediate deletion, immediate arrests, immediate silence. But it was already too late. The image had burned itself into the bones of the galaxy. Two figures' arms wrapped around each other, laughter and love brighter than any weapon ever forged. A memory no bullet could kill. At the World Congress under the cold towers, where laws had been written and fear debates raged. Angry voices cracked the air. Old men and women clinging to old chains, fighting ghosts they could no longer control. But the votes came anyway, one by one, reluctant, terrified, hopeful. And when the final count was tallied, the chamber went silent. The law forbidding interspecies unions, forbidding love between human and hybrid was struck down. Gone. Broken. Finished. Outside crowds erupted into cheers. Families separated by law and borders ran to each other, arms open, tears falling, hands grasping across divides that no longer mattered. Kael stood at the edge of the celebration, Alara's hand clasped firmly in his. He watched the sun rise over a city no longer shackled by fear, felt the warmth of it on his face, and knew they had done more than survive. They had changed the future. He turned to Alara. "Thank you for waiting for me," he said, his voice rough with everything words could not carry. Alara smiled soft and fierce all at once. "You promised you would always find me. And you did. Always." They stood there together as the new dawn broke open above them, a dawn no law could erase, no memory, wipe could steal. Not because they had destroyed the world, but because they had rebuilt it, one vow at a time, one step at a time, one choice at a time. And if you are still here, if you have followed Kael and Alara through the cold, through the dark, through the silence and the storms, then maybe you already know the world does not change because of anger. It changes because of love carried stubbornly through every erasure, every exile, every impossible night. Tell us, have you ever stood for something even when the world told you to forget? Have you ever remembered when it would have been easier to let go? Share your story in the comments, because here at HFY Obsession, we believe that every memory you fight to keep, every bond you refuse to break, is a star stitched into the fabric of a new sky. And we are building that sky together, one impossible vow at a time.